Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm really excited to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. So I'm a civil human minister, and what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. So it's in that effort that I'm looking at my own spiritual heritage to try to find those teachings that I feel are relatable to all people and can be applied to all humans across the board, regardless of our faith, different faiths, or different politics, or our different lifestyle. I truly believe that there are beautiful and relevant teachings in these 2,000-year-old stories that have become. So let's go ahead and jump into Matthew chapter. Stand by 1 second here. It's like we've got waking up in the internet. Give me just 1 second. Okay. Here we go. It looks like we're starting to connect again. Thank you for waiting. It looks like we have a good stream now. And yeah, I'm just going to hope that that remains the case. Anyway, since it probably was breaking up before this, just to repeat, my name is Reverend Dave Thompson. I'm a civil human minister, so I work in the area of building human peace and common ground. And we're walking through the teachings of Jesus to find those common human teachings. So let's go ahead and jump into Matthew chapter 23, verses 34 through 39. And I appreciate you sticking with me through some of these hiccups in the live features and getting internet speeds to work. So let's start with verse 34. Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate, for I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So this is a pretty stern rebuke. This is kind of the end of the rebukes that Jesus is giving. So let me set this up real quick. Jesus is in the temple, which is in the capital city of Jerusalem, and is like the hub of their religious worship and also of their politics of the day. So this is Passover, which is one of the huge days of the year where pilgrims, hundreds of thousands of them, would come to Jerusalem to participate in these feasts and to do all of the things that they needed to do to be a part of their religious expression in their culture. So Jesus right now is sitting in the courtyards of this big temple. And so, all kinds of people are passing through, looking forward to hearing a lot of these teachers come into the temple and to share their thoughts. And Jesus is one of those who has gathered a lot of attention because, as opposed to all of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, all of the religious leaders of his days, Jesus has in fact focused on the people that they've abandoned: the poor, the sick, the leprous, the lame, the blind, all of the people that the Pharisees will not even touch because that would make them unclean. Jesus is in fact focuses his ministry on, and that's made him extremely popular, especially with the common person, as well it should, since he's actually focusing on helping those who are in need. So the Pharisees have come to Jesus and have, in fact, decided to attack him, to try to get him to stumble on his words so that they can catch him in something that they can use to basically bring a cause against him, to bring a lawsuit against him, to put him in prison, and ultimately, honestly, to kill Jesus. And that's one of the things that we're talking about right now. And this is why Jesus is rebuking them in front of everybody, rebuking the religious leaders of the day. And I want to talk about why that is and what this last comment of Jesus is and why he closes it out this way. And it's pretty strong, right? I do want to mention this is probably the most controversial part of Jesus' ministry, especially because he's sitting in what would be their Supreme Court or their government or their Pope's church. It's one of the most important places where the most important and best of the best are. And Jesus is, in fact, rebuking these people, calling them dens of thieves, calling them vipers, and now going to say that the desolation is upon them. I want to walk through this verse to explain what he's actually saying to them and why it makes sense to them and why it says a lot to them. And last, what in the world we can take from it 2,000 years removed as human beings. So I want to walk through just the passage, one verse at a time here. It's a pretty short passage. The first thing is that Jesus begins by saying, look, I've just given you all these woes, all of these rebukes, and here's why, and here's the end of it all. Here's what I'm wrapping it up to be. Because you are doing all these terrible things, I am sending prophets, I'm sending people who will speak on behalf of truth. I'm sending his own students out to teach against these Pharisees and to teach against the religious leaders. Why is that? Because there's a big split right now. And this is going to really tie into the end of this study today and our here and now reality. There's a split socially, politically, religiously, in the whole culture. There's a split between those who are the religious leaders and those who are the everyday people. Those who have a great amount of wealth and power, luxury and influence, and those who have not. There's not much middle ground. And the people over here have focused on purity and righteousness and following all of these laws, these minutiae laws about culture. And the rest of the people here would actually probably love to do that, but they're too busy living and trying to figure out how to survive to be able to follow all of these insane laws about what to eat and how to eat it and what day you're supposed to do it and on what day what you're not supposed to sit next to. And just, I kid you not, it's quite detailed, the list of requirements that these religious leaders have required of the people. And Jesus has called them out and said, you're total hypocrites because you create all of these requirements, but you don't even lift a finger to help these people over here who are trying to survive. You don't feed them, you don't clothe them, you don't help them in any way. You don't even come to them and support them in any way whatsoever. And so now he's pointing out the fact that I'm going to send people to you to remind you all of this because your guilt is going to be completely upon you. In other words, he's saying this, you are without excuse. There is no way that you can dodge the reality that you are believing what you are believing and doing what you're doing. The fact is that Jesus himself is pointing out in front of everybody the harms that the religious leaders of his day are committing against the regular people, the suffering that is being caused. And he's bringing that to the forefront and trying to point it out and says, you are doing the same thing that the terrible leaders before have always done. And he points to Abel, which is one of the first murders in the Old Testament. In the whole story of the Bible, you have Adam and Eve, and then you have Cain and Abel, who are their sons. Cain ends up killing Abel because he was jealous because God, for whatever reason, enjoyed his sacrifice more than he did Cain. And so Cain kills Abel, and Abel is the first example, and this is why Jesus brings it up. Abel is the first example of somebody who did something out of their heart and did something out of sincerity, whereas Cain was merely just fulfilling the requirements. And when he found out that Abel was getting a benefit as a result of his honest work, Cain couldn't have it. And jealous as he was and desirous of the wealth and power that Abel had, he kills them. Jesus is drawing a correlation here to his own religious leaders by saying, look, the same murder that happened back then is exactly what you're doing right now. The people who come to you, these disciples of mine, in Jesus' words, Jesus himself, his words, he's going to be killed exactly in the same way. And so he mentions a couple other people, which I won't go into detail on, but they're essentially the same kind of murder stories. And he's basically pulling from history on common things that everybody would understand. And then he gets into this, and I love this particular passage right at the end here, because it's almost like a lament. It's this passionate plea to Jerusalem, which is their capital city, and sort of represents the Israelite nation. And Jesus says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and those who are sent to help you, you murder them. How often I have wanted to change you, to bring about some change, to bring things back to the virtues of generosity and mercy and compassion. But they were, and he says, unwilling. And so here's the consequence. And this is where Jesus is kind of wrapping up. And this is where I want to tie it into what's going on today in our world. Jesus says, so as a result of this, you are going to face desolation. Meaning this is all going to come to an end. All of the power and the authority that you think that you hold on to will not survive. And in fact, in a matter of 50 to 70 years later, the Roman army comes in and completely demolishes Jerusalem and tears down the temple. And we're actually going to see that in a couple more studies, talking a little bit more about that. So what's the whole point of this? And why does it even matter? What is any, if any, application to us today, here and now, in our society, 2,000 years removed? There are some simple things that I want to point out that may not be so obvious, but they're there, and I think important lessons for us today. One is that there are two types of people, it would seem. Not always, but generally speaking, people fall into two camps. Those who look for power on both ends. One uses violence to persuade individuals, intimidation and violence. And the other uses truth, compassion, the end of human suffering, positivity, for people to realize and to think through the consequence of their actions and to be empathetic and aware of others. And there is a constant struggle through history. And right in this particular time, 2,000 years ago, the religious leaders of Jesus' day were killing the people who were trying to help them, who were trying to bring Israel back. But in fact, these leaders did not want to let go of their luxury, of their power, of their prestige, of the adoration that people paid to them, even though they were paying it because they were intimidated and feared them. But the cost of that, and this is where I believe we can make some application. The cost of that is desolation. There is not one civilization in the world that has lasted who has used intimidation and violence to control their people. It does not work. It may be quick, it may be an instant way to deal with things, but ultimately, people will rebel. People will rise up because there's only so much suffering that human beings can go through. I don't want to talk about that right here, right now. We have religious leaders who are living in luxury, who are living in power and control because they persuade political affairs. They drive nice cars, have nice clothes, live a lifestyle that is of the rich and famous. They do not want to give up that power. That's one thing that we've seen in all of history. And so what do? They use intimidation in the form of the fear of God's punishment, in the form of working with individuals who don't mind showing intimidation and violence and fear. And the same goes with politicians, even today, who are utilizing fear as a driving force, who are trying to point to groups of individuals who are violent and who do want to show force, and using that fear to control people and to keep people in line. Going to violent to do is for fear. We, that is interesting. Election, and you for vigilance. So they book you can